What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to be setting up our backend database. So we're going to use Firestore for our backend database, which is another Google product managed by Google. It's free to begin with and it has is set up to scale pretty largely. It will be free for any low amount of usage for an app, which is where we'll be starting out. There's two main reasons we want to have a backend database. The alternative to having a backend database would just be storing all the data locally on the user's device. And the two reasons we don't want that is, the first one is if a user deletes the app, for instance, we want them to be able to just re-download it, sign back in, have all their data there. As well as if a user has multiple devices, maybe they have two phones or maybe they have a phone and a tablet, we want them to be able to download it and use it on all their devices and it to all be in sync. The other reason, and this is kind of the bigger reason, is that explore feature that we talked about, where we're going to have kind of an aggregate of users' data to give recommendations on budgets per location. So to do that, we're going to need one central location for all that data, so that we can run a few operations on it, a few calculations on it rather, and figure out that average number for each trip, that average budget for each trip. So in this video, we're going to get set up we're going to get connected to the Firebase database. Before we do that though, you might have noticed we've only been using the iOS simulator, as you can see here, and everything's running fine there. I don't have an Android version of a simulator set up yet on my computer, so I'm going to run through that real quick, how to do that, and make sure the app is working on Android first, and then we're going to go ahead and set up Firebase for both Android and iOS because they are slightly different. And then from there, we should be connected and ready to start storing data in our database. All right, let's get started. All right, so to get our Android virtual device running, the first thing we're going to do in Android Studio here is go to Tools and then AVD Manager. This is your Android Virtual Device Manager. So go ahead and click Create a New One. I'm going to go ahead and create a Pixel 3. Hit Next there. We want the OS on it to be this Android Pie, API level 28 or lower actually would be fine. We could test on that. The reason for this is because our project is using the Android SDK version 28, so we would probably run into a few problems using this level 29 API. So regardless, choose Android Pie and hit Next there. You'll probably have to download it. But then just give it a name, and this can be, Pixel 3. That's fine. Like that. All this other default should be good. Click Finish here. Everything looks good there. Now we'll have our one device, and you can do multiple different devices here, so we could test on, all the different levels of the API. But that should be good. The device is kicking up now because I double clicked it, and we just exit out of that, pull the device back up over here. All right, you can see the app looks almost exactly the same as it does in iOS and works very similarly. You can tab through this. That's really the only functionality we have right now. You will notice there are slight differences. The only one I'm really seeing is this title on iOS is centered. On Android, it's left aligned. That's just the defaults of each of the different OSs, respectively. So nothing really to worry about there. The app looks good. We can still use it how we use it on iOS. So perfect. Now we have the app running on both iOS and Android. So let's go ahead and set up Flutter. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do when setting up our Firebase backend is go over to console.firebase.google.com. Once logged in, you're going to want to go to Add Project under Recent Project and just go ahead and click that. So you're going to want to give your project a name. So here I'll use Travel Budget. Okay, it can't have an underscore, so we'll just give it a dash there. And then it's going to create a project ID for you automatically. You could leave that. This, I think, just needs to be a unique ID, but whatever it generates is probably fine. US, we're going to keep it on that. The default settings for sharing Google Analytics and Firebase, I'm just going to uncheck that, but you can leave it checked if you want. And continue. Is basically asking what kind of data you want to share with Google. I'm just going to leave those all unchecked and hit create project. So this is creating us a new project inside of Firebase. And then once we have our project created, we can start using different features in Firebase in our app. The main feature we're going to use is the Firebase Firestore, which is one of two options they have for their database backends. But to start, we need to connect our app. So before we can even connect to Firebase, we need to connect our app to, before we can even start with Firestore, we need to connect our app to Firebase. So to do that, we're going to be doing it with iOS and Android. So to get started with Android, we're going to go ahead and just click this Android icon here, and we're going to be presented with this form. Now, we want our Android package name, which is actually going to be our application ID. So to find what that is, go back into Android Studio, and you want to find this Android folder here, and then open that up and go to the app folder, and there should be a build.gradle file in here. Go ahead and open that up and go down to the default config and find the application ID. Here you'll copy this ID and go ahead and place that right here. That doesn't look like it copied right, but I guess it did. Yeah, a one-man startup. Okay, cool, that looks good. App nickname, you can just call this whatever you like. So the debug signing certificate is optional, so we're going to leave that off for now. We'll worry about that later if we need it. All right, great. And now it's going to bring us to this page where we can download this file. And once we download this file, we're going to move it into our project. Similarly, it's going to be under that application app, and then we're going to drop the file that we just downloaded into there. So that's going to go right in here. All right, so when the file is downloaded, go ahead and pull the file over to the Android app directory. Make sure it isn't under this Android app path there, and hit OK, and that looks good. And do you want to add the following file to Git? Not really. This actually we don't want to add to our source control. So let's go ahead and just hit cancel on that. And then we're going to actually go ahead and if you're using Git and set it up in the last episode, we're going to add that to our git ignore file, which should now be on your main path here. And we can add that by just we just scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we can just say basically anything. We could do wildcard with a star there. Anything that ends with Google services.json, because we're going to have another one of these for iOS. And if we save that, you'll see that the red goes away here, because now we're not going to be keeping that in source control. All right, that's good. You can just exit out of that. So yes, we have this is all set up now. We can go back over here and hit next. All right, so now we need to add the Firebase SDK to our project and for Android. So the first thing we need to add is this class path to our build script dependencies at the project level. So go back over into Android Studio, and we're not going to use this build.gradle. We're actually going to go out a level to Android build.gradle, and we can see we have our build script dependencies, and then we can add that new one right there, and that looks good. And then we also want to make sure that just two other areas are set, that we have Google set up here right under the repositories, and then we also want to make sure we have that same Google importing right here under the all projects repositories. Both of those are already there and should already be there, so that shouldn't need to be added. But if you don't have those, definitely add them. The next thing we're going to do is add back in our app module build.gradle, we're going to add these 2 lines. So this one's going under dependencies, and it's going to be, that's back in this build.gradle file under the app folder. And we're going to add that. It's down at the bottom, dependencies. Go ahead and add the new line and put the implementation of this Firebase SDK. And finally, we need to add the plugin, and this can just go at the bottom of that same file after dependencies. So save that. All right, and then we just need to sync the new dependencies we added with the sync now button. If you don't know where the sync now button is, which I'm not quite sure where it is, it might be this, might be the sync button. Doesn't look like it. So we can actually just run the command from down here. If we open up the terminal here, we can just run flutter packages get. And that will sync our dependencies. I guess the other place you would do it is in your pubspec.yaml file, and you could run the packages get there. But either way, we should have these set up now. And now we can hit next on this one. And it wants us to run our app to verify the installation. So we want to go ahead and run this app on our Android emulator. Alright, so our app is now running with the newest version of our code. So let's go back into Android, or let's go back into our Firebase console, and this is still not picking up that it is installed. It says you may need to uninstall and reinstall the app, so I guess I'll just go ahead and try that. To do that, we can go back into our simulator here and find the app. Oh, alright, great. So it actually finally sunk up. I didn't have to uninstall and reinstall it, it just ended up working, which is awesome. So again, that's running now on Android. So now let's go ahead and get it running for our iOS app. Alright, so we have Android set up with Firebase. Now we need to set up iOS. So first thing we're going to do is in the Firebase console, click Add App here. And this right here is our Android app. So Add App, click on iOS. We're going to get a similar form to fill out here. We're actually going to need to open up Xcode. So opening up a terminal, there's a few ways you could do this, but from a terminal, you can just do right open dot, and that is going to open up our project in the Finder. So from here, we want to go into the iOS folder, right? And then we want to find this file, runner.xc workspace. Make sure it's the workspace one and not the project one. And then just go ahead and double click that, and it should open up our file right in Xcode. Now this is our project in Xcode, and go under the runner up here and then general. It's probably the default that comes up, but this is what we want, this bundle identifier here. As you'll notice, it's slightly different than the Android one. This one has a no dash there in the B, but that's what we're going to use. So copy that and put that over here as the bundle ID. The app can still be travel budget, and we don't need the store ID right now. So go ahead and register that app. Then we want to download that config file similar to the Android version. You'll notice this is also named differently. It's capital G for Google services -info.plist. So we want to go ahead, while that's downloading, firstly go over to our git ignore, and I already added this, but you're going to want to add this as well to, since they're differently named files. Go ahead and add that so it's not in source control. And these actually these could be put in source control, but I think it's best not to have them in there. You can make that decision yourself. Google says that these are public files, so it's your choice as to if you want to do that or not. But all right, now we have our file downloaded. We're going to want to actually add it into Xcode. So open up Xcode again and drag this file right under this runner folder. and then just leave the defaults there and hit finish. All right, now we have that file here in Xcode, and actually if you go back to Android Studio, you'll also notice that it's in here too. But I think we need to add it through the Xcode way as I just showed you. Once that's complete, we can actually go and open up our back in Android Studio, open up our pubspec.yaml file here, and we want to now include the cloud Firestore dependency. So that's actually going to look like this. And we could do this right under Flutter here. And the version I'm using right now is going to be this 0.12.6, and I'll link to this page. When you're watching it, just use the most updated version here. Back in Android Studio, just go ahead and put that there like that. Then click on Get Packages so we can download this Cloud Firestore package. This will actually be used for both iOS and Android, but iOS will not work without this. Android, as we saw, already will verify without this, but they're both going to need it at the end of by the end of it anyway. So once that's run, we can go ahead and open our iOS simulator and run that. And while that's running, we could go back to this page and just click next. We're not going to do the pod file because that's going to be done for us automatically with Flutter. So you can just skip that, as well as this initialization of code. We're not using Swift, so you could skip that. All right, great. And our app is running on iOS now. And as you can see, it was successfully linked with Firebase. So if we continue to our console here, you can see we have two apps now, one for Android, one for iOS. Both are connected to our travel budget project in Firebase. And that's what we're going to be using now, this Firebase console, to deal with data from both of these apps. All right, so after configuring Firebase for iOS and then running the Android emulator again, it's actually giving us some errors. So it looks like the main problem is that that our request is much larger than the maximum limit that's allowed in a packet, or that's allowed for a build. So all right, so after we installed Firebase for iOS, if we go back and try and run our Android app, you will notice potentially a bunch of errors. That's what I'm getting, at least. So we need to figure out how to fix these. It looks like the problem here, I've done a little bit of research on this. The problem here is this. We have too many requests coming in to fit in a single dex file. So essentially what this means is that package that we imported for Firebase is too large for our Android compiler. As you can see, we have 78,000 methods, and there's a max in the Android compiler of 65,000. So after a bit of research, it looks like one quick way to solve this. It's kind of a workaround and not my favorite solution, but it'll work for now, and we'll dig into hopefully better ways to solve this. Is to basically just allow for multi-dexing files. So basically allow to have more than one file. The big drawback with this is that it's only going to work on newer versions of Android. So I think it will only work from the Android SDK version 21 and above. The older versions of Android this will not work for, and the app will just crash as it is now. But anyway, let's go ahead and try and fix this. So if you go into Android app and then the build.gradle file here, and then we find our default config, which is right here, we can add this multi-dex true here. Multi-dex enabled, actually. Oh, and we just actually write true here. All right, and then we also need to add to the dependencies the multi-dex dependency. So down in dependencies here, go ahead and add support for multi-dex. The other thing we want to change then, we are actually on the SDK version 28. This is only going to work on versions 21 and above. So we want to set our minimum SDK version to 21. This means that anyone using an older version of Android is actually not going to be able to use our app. So you're going to need at least Android version 21. But I mean, that's a pretty big gap there for Android version 21. Last thing we want to do, go to this terminal here and just run Flutter clean. And then we should be able to run our app. And we should not get that error as we did before. All right, so yes, that solved our problem. Now, a few things. You'll notice that the app did take a bit longer to load. Probably. It did for me at least. There's also a few notes here. They're not actual errors, they're just notes, so we can leave that for now. We got the app running again, which is great, and it's working. This, I think, is pretty much a workaround for now, so we're going to come back to this. Let's actually go ahead and in our code, put a to-do here. And we can do that just like we have one above. Android Studio does have a bit of documentation on it, so I'll link that there. Yeah, so we're not really going to worry about that now, but it is something we will worry about before we deploy the app. So now we got at least both our apps connected. This is a huge step. All right, subscribe to follow along, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao for now.